Welcome back to again today, guys. I'm really excited to talk about the group of people that I'm going to talk about today, or people that I'm going to talk about today. But today, before I get started, I thought that I should do as my ancestors did, in America, during slavery and after slavery, and as well as the who we're going to talk about today, the Afro-Brazilians, how their ancestors would do in nature. So I decided to come out here today. You see this beautiful park. There's a lot of trees. I don't know if you can see them, but there's like trees blooming everywhere, all kind of trees and little plants everywhere. And it's been raining a lot lately. Actually, today it was raining a little bit earlier, but I really don't care. I love nature, and I decided to do a video outside as our ancestors would have been at, and probably would have liked us to do, rather than being connected to electronics all the time. Even though I'm using electronics, isn't that sort of a contradiction, right? But let's get into it today. I just thought it was beautiful out here, so I wanted to share with you the park is beautiful, and we're going to get right into another group today. Today we will be talking about the Afro-Brazilians. We'll be taking a trip down to Brazil to visit my brothers and sisters and learn more about their culture in Brazil. So the Afro-Brazilians make up 10% of the total population of Brazil. As in the United States, their arrival can be traced back to the slave trade in the late 14 to mid 1500s. Now, 4 million slaves were shipped to Brazil from Africa, and especially they took the slaves from the modern day countries of Angola, Congo, and other African countries. So this, we have to understand and take note that this is 4 times more that were took to Brazil than that were brought to North America. In America, Afro-Brazilians, had cooking customs and music and religion, and this heavily influenced the practices of all races of Brazil and all ethnic groups of Brazil. So just like in America, how majority of African American culture has been, I would like to say almost all of American history as far as music is African American music, and who makes things cool and when we make things cool, even though in history, as we've seen, sometimes what's cool for us because we just do it and this is our life, this is a rhythm, this is who we are, our nature, who we've been for thousands of years coming from Africa. People look at it differently and they don't like it necessarily. Some ethnic groups and some races don't necessarily like it or understand it, but eventually they come around to it and they love it. And even when we were doing it and they didn't love it, they loved it behind closed doors, but it just wasn't, the norm, and they couldn't just be out in public and say, oh, I love to do this. So, as always, in Brazil, the Afro-Brazilian culture is very prevalent and very, very big. It is actually national dish is Afro-Brazilian. Is an Afro-Brazilian dish, which is crazy. So let's get back into this. Now, we must note that in Brazil, the law prohibits that, or any discrimination. The law prohibits that. There should be no discrimination. The law says that there's no discrimination in Brazil, and and this is based on race. There should be no discrimination. But we know that that's not true. And I've had a lot of Afro-Brazilian friends, a couple that I went to school with and came from Brazil, and there's some from different, races that were, white Brazilians or Portuguese, of Portuguese descent or of Asian descent, which was really mind-boggling when I first, met somebody that was Asian from Brazil. But anywho, but there's a very subtle discrimination in racist undertone. Few Afro-Brazilians actually get to go to school. I don't want to say it the wrong way because there are very educated Afro-Brazilians, but few attend college and they have very, very difficulty finding good paying jobs, and this is due to the racism and the whitening of Brazil, or always the urgency to try to show that Brazil is more white than anything else. So with that being said, the population of Brazil at this moment is 162 million, and there are indigenous Indians in the Amazon River region. Let's see. There's immigrants from Europe, such as Portugal, the people, the white Europeans that colonized Brazil and put a lot of the Indians and Africans in slavery, and there's Middle Easterns, people from the Middle East that are there. There are people from Japan that are there, and there's Afro-Brazilians, and that mostly makes up the demographics of Brazil for the most part. Now, the ethnic groups, have intermarried a lot. There's a lot of different ethnic groups that have been there for a long time that have intermarried a lot, that have created these different color classes in Brazil. So in America, you might either be black, white, or mixed, whatever you're mixed with, but those are the three main categories for the most part, unless you're just some other ethnic group that obviously, you know, is your Asian, you know, your Asian American or your Mexican American or whatever it might be. But in Brazil, there's so many different classifications, and in Brazil, most people classify off your skin color. So even though you could be more black if you fit in more on the white side, a lot of the, maybe necessarily, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but a lot of black people, just like they did in America, would, especially if they were really light skinned, would basically, you know, or if they were mixed, they would go more on the white side than the black side, because that would mean better jobs for them, and that would, you know, that just was better. That's what was portrayed in Brazil. Just like majority of places that were colonized that black people were, the whiteness was always portrayed better than the blackness. So with that being said, you know, the population of intermarried people is very, very big in Brazil. Brazil is one of the, you know, most mixed countries in the world. And yeah, so, you know, that is the situation when it comes to racism in Brazil, and we have to understand that there's a very, very big, you know, epidemic going on in Brazil that no one really talks about, and I mean, obviously the lower class talks about, but not necessarily the big wigs talk about, and it's something that is a very, very big issue, but undertone, and it's not really talked about in public a lot. Well, lately it's starting to get a little bit more, you know, let's say it's more like a steamship, you know, it's starting to catch steam, but for the most part, you can't talk about it in public, and you talk about it behind the scenes. So, one more note that we also have to understand is that at one time, the Brazilian government, you know, felt that there was too much mixing and there was too much intermingling with people, and they were very, very scared that, you know, the total intermixing and the total population of intermixing would become I guess basically a country that is not white anymore, or is not majority white. So they were very, very scared of this, and with that intermixing, they actually started to, you know, bring in Europeans from Europe to make sure that the mixing doesn't go crazy, and basically the white race survives in Brazil. And so with this happening, you know, and actually let's go back a little bit. Before that happened, it was a long time ago that this actually started. It's sort of like a chain reaction, because when the Portuguese would leave Portugal and other Europeans, and they would come to explore, they would often leave their families, and they would often leave their children or their lives at home. So when they would do that, the only women that they had at the time were, you know, Africans that they brought over, and indigenous Indians that were there. And so the mingling and intermixing started a very, very long time ago. But you know, to avoid this, since, you know, that's an event that happened a long time ago, and it really started to get very scary in like the last 50 to 60 years, or let's say the last 50 to 100 years, what Brazil did is it made it basically made a plan. You know, a government actually made a plan that was like, you know, to bring tens of thousands of Europeans from Europe to basically go out with the plan, and the plan was called the Bleaching of Brazil. And the Bleaching of Brazil was basically, you know, like I just said, to make Brazil more white again. So that is something that we have to note and understand, you know, about what's really going on, and how Afro-Brazilians are facing certain things in Brazil. Now, we have to understand with a lot of Afro-Brazilian history, just like African Americans in America that picked cotton, and they were basically the manpower of the time, or, you know, I guess you could say, like some people said, the machines of the time. The Afro-Brazilians picked both sugar and cocoa seeds, and they, you know, the sugar and cocoa seeds in Brazil were produced in a state called Bahia. You know, I don't know if you guys like my Portuguese, but Bahia, and a state, you know, that was in the northeastern part of Brazil. And Bahia became the part of the arrival for many of the slaves and the center of Afro-Brazilian culture in Brazil. So in fact, most Bahia Brazilians are Afro-Brazilians, and as of the late 1990s, a lot of the Afro-Brazilians started to move around more outside of Bahia, and they moved to places, probably more famous places that you would know, or most people know, such as that are major cities, are Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. So the official language of Brazil, as we know, is Portuguese, and Afro-Brazilians also speak Portuguese. but they learned it to communicate with the European Brazilians and with the other Afro-Brazilians that spoke only Portuguese. And some words such as samba, which is a Brazilian dance, Afro-Brazilian dance, or created by Afro-Brazilians, have their roots in the African language. And in African Brazilian religion, the original African names of the gods, such as the deities too, ceremonies and dancers are still used. So a lot of Afro-Brazilians are still worship the Orishas of West Africa, as well as other African religions that started in Brazil, that were based on African religions that were brought over, but were sort of intermingled with other beliefs that the Afro-Brazilians started to believe in when they came over from Africa. So you have the African religion, plus you have other Afro-Brazilian religions that are very prevalent in Brazil. And it's very, very funny because the Afro-Brazilians had it worse, I would say worse than African Americans. But as far as slavery, I mean, some really, really gruesome stuff, and African Americans had it bad, but Afro-Brazilians had it horrible. But the difference I noticed about Afro-Brazilians, the Afro-Brazilians kept more of their culture, even though we kept our culture in some senses, but they kept some of the African words, and they kept the religions, African religions that they have, unlike us, which majority of African Americans are either Christians or Muslims. And then after that, you have, African Americans that are spiritual or believe in West African gods, East African gods, North African gods, whatever it might be, or Buddhism or whatever religion it is. So Afro-Brazilians religions are popular with blacks and whites alike in Brazil, either way. There's people that are not, black in Brazil that still participate in these religions and believe in these religious beliefs. And some groups follow the traditional African religious practices, like I just said. An example is Candomblé. Candomblé is a religion that was brought from the Yoruba people in Nigeria when they came to Brazil as slaves. Different gods and goddesses, as we know, some, especially back in West Africa, like Oshun and Shango and the Orishas of West Africa. So Brazil has a very, very very deep connection with the motherland, just like most Caribbeans and most South American black people do. So that is something that was very, very interesting that I really, really love to find out, and I would like to actually find out more. I'm going to be doing another video about that the Afro-Brazilian religions. So definitely, I don't want to go too far into that because I don't want to take away from that video, but definitely be waiting for that. Now, based on these traditions, the Afro-Brazilian community is very, very tight-knit and very spiritual, just like I feel most black people in the world are very, very spiritual. Come to my family, they'll be like every little thing, what I'm saying? I'm pretty sure but every little thing. So Afro-Brazilians are very, 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 very spiritual, especially being connected with their African religion, very, very spiritual in spirituality. And most Afro-Brazilians are deeply, deeply religious, and their beliefs show in every aspect of their lives, like I said. And it is very, very common, for example, for an Afro-Brazilian to leave food and candles on the corner of the street as offerings to the spirits, and peace to the spirits. And many Afro-Brazilians live in poverty and, in urban areas. And with this happening, there is a lot of folklores and tales and things of that nature. So with a lot of Afro-Brazilians living in basically the poor or ghetto areas, and outside of Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, is very famous throughout the world, on steep hillsides, that the first people settled in these areas of these homes usually were Afro-Brazilians and other poor people. And now the people at the bottom of the hill, usually are the ones that are more lucky, I would like to say, I guess, because the bottom of the hill houses, or the houses on the bottom of the hills, have more access to electricity and running water, and further up the hills are newer and less accessible communities. So that is definitely an interesting thing. If you ever seen any of the Brazilian Fadela, somebody tell me if I'm saying it wrong, because I probably am, but the hillside houses, they're very famous. They're known throughout the world, used in a lot of movies, and probably the poor people probably didn't get paid for it, but it's very famous throughout the world, and I think a lot of people, when they see it, they definitely would recognize that as Brazil, or very familiar to Brazil. Now, there is definitely regional differences in dress in Brazil, and largely in the Afro-Brazilian community, they use different kind of, or they wear different kind of clothing. Now, the black woman in Brazil usually wears dress clothing inspired by, 18th century wear or clothing wear. And this is a colorful, full-length skirts that are worn with white blouses, and this is what the Afro-Brazilian woman usually wears, and varies from region to region. But the black woman also wears scarves and turbans tightly wrapped around her head, which that's every black woman in the whole world, so I don't think that's something that would be new to you. That's the African culture that was brought over to America, to Brazil, Jamaica, wherever it might be. You always will see a African woman, a woman of African descent, wrapping her hair. So also, brightly colored beads, I would like to say too, are worn by men and women, not just women, men and women. And these beads have a religious symbol, and they're very symbolic, and they have symbolic meaning. And the color of the beads reflects the African, God that the person is representing, or is very special to that person. So Afro-Brazilians also are very, very deep and very, very, prideful of their food. And Afro-Brazilian food combines African food with Portuguese and indigenous Native American ingredients. And this cooking tradition is something that goes very, 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 very deep. And African peppers are usually used. African spices are now grown in Brazil, have been, brought over and now are grown in Brazil, in the northern eastern state of the country, and they are widely used in Afro-Brazilian cooking. Now, dindi oil is extracted from African palm grown in Brazil now, and dindi is used to make a dish, a very spicy mix of sauteed shrimp, tomato, and it's a black bean and pork stew traditionally cooked in an African-style pot. Now, feijoada is considered the national dish of Brazil, and so Brazil slaves created feijoada using the discarded pieces of pork, such as the tail, the snout, the feet, that they were given by the owners, which, hey, we all in the same boat. I'm African American, so yeah, even some African Americans still eat like that, and they still use that food. So yeah, it's definitely the same connection. Whatever the slave owners had left, that's where you got African Americans, Afro-Brazilians. It's just like this, same thing, pork. We had chitlins, all that kind of stuff. We created stews just like you did. So the stews are stewed very slowly with spices and beans, and this dish was so tasty that it was soon copied by the slave owners. Even the slave owners couldn't, run from it. They loved it. They wanted to eat it. And feijoada is now made with prime cuts of pork and beef at the moment. So it's became the national dish as well. So from something negative came something that was accepted by the whole country, and is the national dish now, is loved by most Brazilian people, or people of Brazilian nationality. So Brazilian music traditionally drew heavily from African instruments, as well as the rhythm and the dance. Samba music, now popular around the world, is a direct descendant of African music. Like most Caribbean or even in Latino music, you can hear the African presence in there from the African slaves and people that were there from African descent. So this is another big part of the influence in South America, America, and the Caribbeans, respectively. Now, as we know, there is a lot of famous Afro-Brazilians, but definitely one that is probably the most famous in the world. My father used to watch him growing up. And my grandfather, I really love this guy. Hopefully I can meet him one day, because I'm into soccer. Yes, there's not too many African Americans that like soccer more than basketball and football, but I must say I probably do like soccer more than basketball and football. I mean, I love basketball, football, don't get me wrong, but I do love soccer probably a tidbit more, because I played it, and I love, the World Cup, loved it, like I watched every day, and I love it. I can't wait to the next 4 years. But one of the most famous soccer players in the world is Pele. He's an Afro-Brazilian, and he obviously was born from 1940, or he, played soccer in Brazil as well, until, he's still alive. He didn't die yet, and actually I'm gonna make a video about Pele too, so, watch out for that. But Pele is an Afro-Brazilian that led Brazil to the national team World Cup championships in 1958, 1962 and 1970. So he is so popular that some people think that he should run for president of Brazil. And everyone in Brazil plays and watches soccer. And soccer, the soccer stadium in Rio de Janeiro holds 200,000 people and is the largest stadium in the world. So a more distinctive Afro-Brazilian activity also, just like how Afro-Brazilians love soccer, is capoeira. And capoeira is something that I'm trying to learn currently, and I really would love to learn. And capoeira is a martial arts that is more like dancing than fighting. And this was brought over by slaves from Angola and in West Africa. And this form of foot fighting was banned by slave owners. And in fact, in order to disguise it, this practice, slaves transformed the foot fighting into a rhythm gymnastic dance form. And accompanied by music, capoeira dancers gracefully use arm and leg motions, as well as designed to barely miss the opponents. And this is the practice, or this is the certain kind of games that they have that they play, which can turn very serious. So you can do capoeira like this, you know, you're dancing, you know, you're kicking, and then eventually, like whenever either you or the other person that's sparring with each other, you can turn it into a real fight, or you can just be, and there's different kind of games. And I'll get into that. I'm definitely going to talk about capoeira. Capoeira is something that I've loved. I'm pretty sure if you've played or even watched the Tekken movies, you've seen Eddie Gordo, and Eddie Gordo is, you know, he does capoeira, you know, and if you play Tekken, that guy from, you know, when he had the Jamaican pants on and stuff like that from your childhood, if you did play Tekken, he has that dancing African fighting style. So, that is capoeira. And now with that, Afro-Brazilians are very, very proud people. And today, the largest population of black people outside of Africa is Brazil. So today we learn about Afro-Brazilians, and I wish I could speak a little Portuguese for some Afro-Brazilians that might not possibly understand what I might be saying right now. But yo, you understand the love, you understand we all together. And Afro-Brazilians, I know you are not treated like you should be in Brazil, but you are here, you exist. Yo, from your brother in America, from an African in America, to my brothers down in Brazil, my sisters down in Brazil, I hope you guys be safe, prosperous. There's a lot of things that you guys created, a lot of people that came out of slavery and became good things that I will be talking about. And today we learned about another one of our people. So Afro-Brazilians, they are, like I said, a very proud, beautiful people. And yo, as always, to all my Afro-Brazilians and to all my Africans around the world, in America, in Somalia, in England, in India, in Australia, in Papua New Guinea, to the indigenous people, you know, I hope you guys are going to prosper soon, and I hope the government over there stops killing you guys. And you know, to all my people around the world, be safe and stick together. And once again, one love. I'm out. Peace.